Okay, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about a basic philosophical tenet that starts to occur in the 1920s, but has a very big impact on the postmodern era in literature, and that's what's something known as existentialism. And it really starts with a group of French philosophers. It sort of kind of starts with the German philosopher. This stuff you don't really need to know. In the end, it started officially as an idea by a guy named Jean-Paul Sartre. And essentially, the idea is in the absence of truth with a capital T that we lost on the end of our realistic era and in our modernist era. If you were to reject this notion of a capital T truth at the center of the universe. So if you go back to a lot of philosophical tracks in the 1800s and stuff, most of them were concerned with trying to find some sort of capital letter thing like God or truth or meaning or something. And that was metaphysics, trying to peel back the layers of reality and discover something that exists beyond our universe that gives everybody meaning. Well, once we get to existentialism, we have Friedrich Nietzsche saying, thus spake Zarathustra, their God is dead, essentially. And so that means that there's no truth with a capital T in there. There's no meaning left anymore. And so a lot of existentialists say, look, if you go and you take a look for the meaning of life, if you peel back all of the layers, you will find that there's nothing there, which means inherently that life itself is an absurd process. You're born, a bunch of stuff happens, and then you die. Okay, and there's really not much there to provide one with meaning other than the meaning that you find within yourself. Okay, in other words, that you can do whatever you want to, you can be whoever you want to, all of this sorts of things, and you just kind of have to carve your own identity because there's not one massive goal to achieve. Like, you're not supposed to become one with God, you're not supposed to find out the truth, you're not supposed to have some sort of meditative relationship with the arts. All those sorts of things are gone now, and existentialism says, look, it's all out there, okay? You can do whatever you want to do. Now, on the other hand, that sounds like sort of a cool prospect in philosophy, that you can be whoever you want to be. But Jean-Paul Sartre will say, okay, there's some goods to that, but also the bad thing is that in the end, man as a entity, okay, or mankind, I guess I should say, is therefore paralyzed or stunned by the immensity of nothingness in front of him. In other words, without being able to give him meaning, okay, then the ability to derive it doesn't really matter all that much because there's still too much to choose from. There's no like one guiding principle. There's no one set of beliefs or a truth with a capital T that's out there sort of guiding people to do certain things. Now, you'll see this reflected in literature a lot during this era, the postmodern era, because what happens is a lot of our stories will kind of find that as sort of a plot narrative or element. So if you read some of the postmodernist stories, you're going to be wondering, nothing happens. There's one dude and he's talking to another dude, and that's the end of the story. And really, that's what postmodernism really focuses on. If you go back to the 40s and 50s, there's going to be a whole bunch of plays by guys like Samuel Beckett, Eugene Ionesco, across the board, Bertolt Brecht. All of them will start to change up how they approach theater. But in the middle, what happens is that they say, look, we're just going to experiment. We don't really have a purpose other than to sort of stretch the boundaries of what you can do in a theater, stretch the boundaries of conventional notions of plot even further than our modernists did, and so on. So that's what happens. It was known as the theater of the absurd because, again, that notion, if you peel back all the layers, there's nothing there, just absurdity at the center of someone's existence. And so in the end, that's existentialism, and that's what we're seeing in postmodernist era, that there's just not a lot of stuff going on. People are paralyzed by the immensity of nothingness in front of them. They're just sort of wandering around, bumping into things, trying to figure out who they are, where they belong, how they fit in with the world, and that sort of thing too. So we'll see, for instance, with Jack Kerouac, he will have a series of attempts to, in his short selection from Big Sur, to find meaning. And you'll see a whole bunch of different alternatives appear in our postmodern work. So Jack Kerouac, he's going to say Eastern religions might be the way, drug use might be the way, homosexuality might be the way, and in some cases all three. And so John Cheever will point out too that if you take a look at this suburban environment, you have all these people waking up at, in the morning, going to work, coming home in the evening, going to sleep, waking up, and so on, just have this cycle, all to live in a house that looks exactly like everyone else's. And so you will see in a lot of these postmodern works authors trying to sort of figure out what to do with a character now that no longer has a meaning or purpose in life. And really, in a nutshell, existentialism is much larger, goes back much further, but it's popularized during the 30s and 40s. And then I think by the time we get to a postmodern era, it's pretty firmly entrenched, especially at the beginning of that, as a notion that will sort of dominate culture and literature as a whole. So as you read these short stories, you read these poems, you'll find that people are sort of overwhelmed by the nothingness in front of them. And that's really what is existential in a lot of ways in our literature, the idea that we're just paralyzed by the immensity of nothingness in front of us. There's no truth, there's no capital G God, there's truth with a capital T, no meaning, no ultimate goal to achieve. You're born, stuff happens, you die, end of story, and so you can tell it's pretty bleak. Jean-Paul Sartre fought in the resistance during World War II for the French, saw lots of stuff. We can go back to some of his early German predecessors like Hegel. They start to lay the groundwork out of World War One. This notion, and even a little bit before that, that all of this stuff like kings and queens and people who are inheriting stuff from God, their roles in society, they really start to question that. And so we see this being sort of, we could say it evolves over time, and therefore by the time we get to our postmodern era, we start to see this a lot more. So as you read a lot of our literature during this time period, keep that in mind. If you read a whole lot of nothing happening, that's kind of the format of the story, but then also the small character choices that are made, things that may possibly be an antidote, or an antidote rather, or some sort of solution to finding meaning. All of the characters sort of groping for something to make sense out of. The question is whether or not that something can help them out in the end.